Good evening.
Good.
Good. Yourself?
Yesterday, Dawn called and said she was coming to class to pick her up.
Hello, Sharon. Hang on, we got to get you unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes. We're eventually going to get you all situated on this whole thing, maybe.
Oh, that's fine.
Okay. All right. And I know Connie and Gerald had some appointments today, but I don't know, or this week, I don't know what day it was.
It was today.
Okay, so I'm sure she won't be here tonight because I think they had like 3 appointments today with different things. So,
She called a while ago and said her surgery now is going to be February 8th.
February 8th. Okay.
You can have that till,
Yep.
I can't even think of Dale's name.
I hear you. I do that. I'm going to text him right now before I forget. And I couldn't think
Well,
of it for a second. So.
You could probably wait a couple of weeks, put it in the bulletin. It's still a month almost away.
Okay.
Whatever you want to do.
Well, if I text it to him now, I can at least say, hey, I texted that. Remember to put it in the bulletin.
There you go.
And it's his responsibility, right? Okay. And I'm off the hook. Okay. All right. So there's that. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. There's that. All right. All right. So she won't be here tonight. And I know last week Misty wasn't feeling good and I forgot to text her today. But I know they've been busy with all the appointments with her father-in-law. So I say we just go ahead and get started. And then if anybody comes in, then we'll be good to go. So let us pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this opportunity we have to gather together tonight as ladies to study your word and to have a better understanding of what you would have us to do in our lives. Thank you for the inspired word that we have so that we may know what your will in our lives is and be able to fulfill that. Thank you for sending Jesus to fulfill this law so that we may have eternal life with you when we are willing to keep your commandments. I pray that you be with those who are unable to join us tonight due to illnesses or traveling, and I pray that they are able to join us soon. I pray a blessing on all those right now who are recovering from illnesses and dealing with COVID, and I pray a blessing on all the healthcare professionals. May they make wise decisions while caring for the patients, and for all the Christians who are out there in the healthcare field. I pray that you give them the strength to spread the gospel to the patients so that in some of their darkest hours, they may know of the hope that we have in you. Be with us as we go throughout this study tonight. May we have open minds and open hearts so that we may see your truth in your word, and help us to avoid being tainted by what any man has to say regarding your word. I pray all these things through Jesus' precious name. Amen. Okay. So last week we did a quick rundown of the answers for question 10A regarding the Sabbath. And there were basically, commandments of not to kindle a fire, not to carry things, not to plow, not to harvest, keep it holy. There were a lot of special feast days associated with counting the Sabbath, and even, hang on, let me go turn this air off. There were the special feast days that were called a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So the Sabbath was not just the seventh day. We can see where the Sabbath actually referred to special occasions. And so what we're going to start with tonight is going through a list of the 39 prohibited activities that Orthodox Jews recognize today. And she has a list here in the book, but then she also gave a website to go to that broke these down to help a person today know how to be an Orthodox Jew and how to keep the Sabbath. So we're going to kind of discuss some of these and see what we can understand from this. So the first thing that is forbidden was carrying. And it talks about you can't carry anything in public. And it does talk about that this was one of the categories that was specifically mentioned in the Torah. And it was a prohibited type of work. They do talk about, the Sabbath, the manna, and how they could not go collect the manna on the seventh day. And let me see how we get to these notes. The right page of notes here. There were things like carrying things outside of the house that they talked about. And so that was one of the things, you couldn't even carry your car keys. You couldn't carry the keys. You could only carry them on what could be worn. So an Orthodox Jew today can't walk out of the house carrying their keys. It has to, I have mine on a lovely lanyard here, so I could wear my lanyard and this would be okay. But I couldn't just physically hold them and carry them. Let's see here. Says this forbids all carrying in the street. Couldn't even carry a handkerchief. Pocketbooks, purses couldn't be carried. So only what can be worn. So I thought that one was just really interesting. Also, you couldn't carry inside the house except necessary objects. And So I'm sitting here going, I guess that means I can carry my kids in the house, you know, like babies, but I guess at what point? Because of course, at this point, Lyra is now too big, but I mean, we typically usually carry our kids a little bit long after the point where they can be carried, should be carried, you know, like they can walk and stuff, but we'll carry them for whatever reason. So I'm like, can you carry your kids? What does that look like? So that was one of the things that I found.
Kids aren't objects.
Well, you are an object. You're just a living object. The thing I found really fascinating was that the carrying was connected to ownership. And you couldn't, this ownership idea is tied to having authority over creation, which is what they were very specifically trying to avoid. There are several things that prohibit showing authority over creation. Anybody have any other thoughts on carrying? What?
For the carrying a person, like wearing a belt and have like a little satchel, like belt pouch on it.
Maybe, that might be one way that you could do it. I'm not real sure, to be honest. It just says you have to be able to wear it. So there were some things that I honestly struggled with understanding.
Yeah, because you can wear like a purse, like a strap. Right?
Yeah, I can wear it, but I'm still also carrying it. If you trust me, it gets heavy. No. Carry a purse long enough, it gets real heavy. You know, you're not wearing it anymore. You're carrying it. All right. Any other thoughts on that?
Of course, I haven't read. So I had this paper as far as the whole law. But that wasn't, some of these certain words are used in what we've been reading, the scriptures. But it was working.
Yes.
It wasn't just you're going outside your house so you don't carry this or that. It had to do with working, didn't it?
It did. It did have to do with work. Yes.
When Moses, so at what point did things change?
Well, again, because so it gets really complicated as we look at some of this. The Sabbath is just one of the things we're looking at today. But it does get very complicated to be an Orthodox Jew today. Because my sister-in-law we had a conversation one time. She read a book about a gentleman he's a Jew, and he was trying to decide if he was going to be a Jew, an Orthodox Jew, or if he was going to be a Christian, or if he was just going to be a regular Jew, basically. And he writes this book. And he talks about how difficult it was trying to be a practicing Orthodox Jew, because when you are a practicing Orthodox Jew, there are commandments that have to do with not coming in contact with a woman during her menstrual cycle. And so, like, he couldn't shake a woman's hand without asking questions like, are you menstruating? Because if you're menstruating, I can't touch you, you know? And so Orthodox Judaism today is a very, very complex thing because of the fact that they are not isolated anymore. Back when the law was written, they were really isolated in a lot of ways, you know, and then they developed their nation. And so there was when the women were unclean, they weren't going out and about. There wasn't some of these issues. And so how that gets translated over into a modern era where cleanliness is, at least in first world countries, cleanliness is very easy to obtain. There are certain things that, you know, the law was designed in some places to grow and build a healthy nation, which is why you have some of your food restrictions. They couldn't eat pork because pigs eat everything. And if you don't cook pork appropriately to the right temperature, you will get very ill. And so there were things designed. Now, there were things in the law that they were the law because God said they were the law, and that's just all there is to it. There are other things we can specifically see some direct correlations. Again, food restrictions had to do with not getting sick, had to do with a healthy diet, so we could grow a nation. The, you know, when you were sick and quarantining, that was something that God, you know, if you're sick, don't be around other people. That was something God instituted because, again, he's growing a nation. He has to grow a nation to bring the Messiah through the line. And so some of those were really, like, you can see how it very much applies to a very isolated nation. But when we take these things outside of an isolated nation to a people who are spread all throughout, it becomes very complicated in how you would keep these rules so meticulously. And again, we look at the Sabbath, and as we have seen, it was that blessing. They had been slaves in Egypt. They were working. I mean, they were working themselves, you know, to death in a lot of respects. You know, there wasn't, you know, safety things in place. And so this was a blessing from God to not have to work. And so you're right. These carrying restrictions were designed to keep you from working. But what is, you know, what's the difference in working versus carrying a purse? I mean, you know, I think that the Orthodox Judaism for this, and again, like, I don't understand some of this stuff where it talks about how carrying is connected to, like, the transfer of ownership of property. That's under the carrying law. That I do not understand this.
Let's go on.
Yeah. Now I know there were things in the old law and Jewish custom, like when a person redeemed, like you can look at the book of Ruth, and when somebody came and redeemed property, there was an exchange of a sandal. And so you would be carrying somebody else's sandal. And so I'm guessing that's some of the ties, like that's the only way I can connect some of this transfer of ownership. Some ownership I can understand, other ownership I don't understand, because I'm not carrying anything to transfer the ownership. But how do you?
Well, that would come back to working, because that would be people that are doing daily business, except when on the day that they're not supposed to be doing business.
Yes. Well, and even so, you know, they're not supposed to, like we see very specifically, I think it was in Jeremiah, where when the people wanted to come into the city on the Sabbath, they were not, you weren't allowed to buy and sell and do any of that. And so, but I don't know, I can't, and I guess they tie it all back to this carrying, but to me, that would be under its own heading, not under carrying. But that would even, I mean, when you put that in modern day implications, that means you can't do any online shopping on Saturday. I can't order my grocery pickup so I can pick it up Monday morning on Saturday because I'm transferring ownership. So it really, when you look at the nitty gritty of it, it's really.
This is what they teach for young people.
Mm-hmm. Orthodox Jews. Now, there is a difference in an Orthodox Jew and regular Jews. Orthodox Jews are those who are practicing the Mosaical law as purely as possible that they can in today's modern world, which technically is completely impossible because God destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70, and he destroyed any way for them to have Aaronic priest. And without the Aaronic priesthood, you can have no sacrifices. Therefore, with no sacrifices, you can have no redemption, no forgiveness of sin, no nothing through the Jewish system. Therefore, the idea of being a practicing Orthodox Jew today is really actually kind of an oxymoron. It's something like you can try to do, but there's absolutely no possible way of doing it. God made sure of that.
They don't do sacrifices anymore anytime.
None, because they can't.
I wondered,
Yeah. Because when the temple was destroyed in AD 70, all of the records that held the documents to track the Aaronic line were destroyed. Only Levites can serve as priests anyway. But the Aaronic line, of course, would be the high priesthood. But all of the documents were destroyed. There is no way to tell. You can say you're a Jew and legitimately can track your Jewish heritage, but you cannot track the tribes anymore. It's impossible. God made sure it was absolutely impossible. So in essence, when he allowed Rome to come in and destroy Jerusalem in AD 70, God wiped out the Jewish religious system because they cannot offer, and they don't, because they know they have no priest. So the Orthodox Jew today will practice the law as completely as they can, but there are many things that cannot be done, like sacrifices. Anything that involves the priesthood, period, cannot be done. But you will still find Jews who gather on the Sabbath to read the Torah. You still find Jews who have priests who circumcise on the 8th day. You will still find Jews who keep the Sabbath. A true Orthodox Jew, as we said, will not touch a woman during her menstrual uncleanness. And there are many things like that. They can't even, and it gets even more complicated because, like, if you were to ride a bus, you have to be very careful because you can't sit in the seat that a woman in her menstrual uncleanness has sat in because of the law, because of how meticulous it was. But again, when you are in an isolated country, even when they're in captivity, they are so isolated, even in their captivity, that they're not having to intermingle and mix. And back then, all women, like during their menstrual cycles, they weren't doing stuff. So that wasn't an issue then. But today in our society, how can you do that?
Can you just like get a wipe down?
I don't know if, and they might be able to. I can't remember what Aunt Mindy said about that, to be honest. But so that's an issue there. So this is truly what the Orthodox Jews teach. Regular practicing Jews they're really Jews more by title than they are religion. Now they do, of course, they don't believe in Jesus as the Messiah. They don't, and they would study the old law. They're still awaiting their Messiah. But they aren't as strict. They don't view things like the menstrual uncleanness as being an issue in today's world, because it's where they really start picking and choosing the rules that they want to follow because of what matches our society and how they can accomplish these things. But the Orthodox Jew will follow the letter of the Mosaical law as completely as possible, which will include these teachings. But I think the regular Jews today will do a lot of this, maybe not all of it, but quite a bit of it.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Because if you're not familiar with the Orthodox Jewish practice,
All those things on TV, well, then, was it the beginning of last year when they were burning the synagogues and killing people?
yeah,
Walking into the synagogues and just stuff on TV like
Mhm.
that in movies. and
Yes.
TV, you know,
Yeah.
if that's true or not.
yeah.
TV show. But, so that's the only way I'm familiar with any of the teachings or anything.
I was less familiar until I had a conversation with my sister-in-law who had read this book, and we were having this discussion, and I did some more looking into it and things afterwards. And I've had some other conversations along the way, which is the only reason I know anything about because it's a different system. Sharon, did you have any thoughts on any of that?
No, ma'am. I listed all of them that were listed, but I didn't write any notes. I've got them pulled up here as you're talking,
Okay,
but no, I don't have any comments.
okay. What's your comment, Carrie?
So how they have to carry things and how it's specific.
Mhm.
If, for an example that I like to think of, is they're walking through the house and they had some pre-cut wood for fire.
But they can't burn.
Exactly.
So that's a whole nother thing.
But jump ahead of the time.
You are.
But they couldn't even pick up the wood. Like some kids will like pick up wood and play with it. They couldn't even pick up the wood.
It was interesting having this conversation with Lyra because she's coming at this from this child's perspective of, well, what can I do and what can I not do? And trying to, it was really interesting. So yeah, because Lyra plays with sticks all the time. She's like, I can't pick up sticks. Can I pick up my toys? Can I, and I don't know, honestly, when it comes to the Orthodox practicing Jew, I don't know where some of these lines, like at what age it becomes rigid for their children. I'm really not sure on that. All right.
I hadn't thought about it. I was thinking as a parent,
Mm-hmm.
carrying, you have to carry a baby.
Yes.
You have to clean the baby.
Yes.
You can't let it go the whole 24 hours or more,
Yeah.
depending on and that was another thing. This began at sundown.
On Friday evening. Yes.
So during the summer, your days are longer.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Daytime hours are longer, so you could have the time would be.
So, okay. So I see where you're going with that. Now,
It's not from 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock to 6 o'clock, it's sundown to
yes.
sundown.
Yes. So in the summertime, if you are truly practicing according to sundown, in the summertime, we're talking, as late as 10 o'clock on a Friday evening, which would go though until as late as 10 o'clock on Saturday evening. So you would still essentially get your same 24 hours. Yes. So even though our days and our nights fluctuate with our seasons, when you measure from sundown, which is a very interesting way with which God has his measurements of measuring from sundown to sundown, while the length of day and night might be different, sundown to sundown is always sundown to sundown. It will always fit, pretty close to that 24-hour time period as days get longer and days get shorter. So, but yes, that's how that is counted. All right, number 2, burning. And this is where I struggled, lighting a fire versus keeping a fire going. I couldn't quite figure, I'm like, what's the difference with lighting a fire versus like keeping a fire going? Like, because that involves work to keep a fire going. How big do you have to build your fire to keep it going?
Like you said, you couldn't put another log in the fire.
Correct.
What if you accidentally, like, if there was like something on the floor and you accidentally kicked it into the fire?
You'd be in trouble, I
You
guess.
had to how would you get it out?
Well, you couldn't.
Exactly, because that would be work, and then you would have.
But there is something that addresses that later. So we'll get to that. So hold that thought. Another interesting thing, when we got a new stove last summer, sometime, I don't know. And it has a Sabbath setting on it. And the Sabbath setting is you turn it onto the Sabbath setting, and the oven will, first off, the numbers, the screen the digital thing goes black. So you don't see any glowing objects. And another thing that it does is the oven will turn itself on and keep itself on for that whole Sabbath setting, that 24-hour setting, at kind of like a keep warm temperature. So when you make your food, and that way, because you can't warm it up, you just have to eat it as it is, you would put it in the oven on this Sabbath setting, on this keep warm setting, and that way it would be warm. Now, the thing that got me on this though is because it says no burning. Well, that's a gas stove. A gas stove implies that gas is always burning. Like there is always a fresh feed of the gas to burn it. So if they can't burn, how does the Sabbath setting technically work on my oven? Because the gas is always burning. It's not,
It may not even matter. It may not get that.
well, and that's why for me, as I'm looking at this, I'm like, I don't understand where you draw the lines on these. I think living under the old, like living in ancient biblical times, I can understand these rules and how you would keep them. I cannot understand them given what our lifestyle looks like today.
I don't.
So I struggled with that one.
After the 35 tree, it says kindle no fire. So if you had your fire kindled on the 6th day, could you?
I don't know. I needed to check that because I wanted to see what the meaning of the word kindle actually. Because for me, I think of kindling, like I know it's starting a fire, but does that include stoking it, or stoking it something totally different in terms of kindling?
I wonder if like every night, like before it's the next day, you would have to put out the fire because one, you wouldn't be able to soak it, or would you just let it burn because you wouldn't be able to soak it?
When you look at the Strong's definition of this word, it says to kindle, consume, to burn, to feed, to heat, to set on fire. So most of it appears to be the setting something on fire to start, most of it appears to be the starting of the fire. But there is one that it's be burning. Well, burning is a present tense. So I'm not real sure how that, I guess it's just the point of you just can't start the fire. You can maybe keep it going, but you can't carry a log to put on there. So I'm again, how big do you have to build it?
Did it say that the carrying was on the outside and in public? So
It was minimum carrying on the inside. So only carrying what you had to carry on the inside.
You might
maybe
have.
that's more log.
If you just,
Small,
yeah, if you had it all in there to start with, maybe.
justifying your sin.
I know, yeah.
Who knows? I mean, how do you know? How would they know?
You would have to get.
Their leaders tell them.
Yes.
And that's another thing. This is the leaders telling what to do instead of
God's word.
following what God says.
Yes.
That's my biggest problem.
Yeah.
Just all of it.
Yes. So these orders come down from the Sanhedrin. And again, I'm not sure when.
I've got you off track.
No, it's fine. I'm just going, I'm not sure when. It doesn't give you any idea, any indication as to when some of these were last amended, to know maybe, because that makes a difference too. Okay. Well, let's look at number 3. So we said no burning, but the next thing, you can't extinguish anything. So you can't lower a flame in any way. One may not turn down the gas. So I guess it's fine that my oven would be lit, but the temperature couldn't be adjusted, which is why it has the Sabbath setting. And The thing I did find interesting though was it was allowed to be violated whenever there was any possible danger to human life. So in the case of a fire, you could break the law.
I guess you could carry water then to put out the fire. I mean, like,
You could do some of it, but again, one of the issues that I have with the system of Judaism, and even some of the stuff as you read through the old law, like when the temple was being built, we've already looked at the fact that they weren't supposed to be using any graving tools to be making any carved images. And so to avoid any Jews doing this, I meant to look this up. I can't remember if it was David or Solomon who started having the Gentiles work out in the quarry. The Gentiles worked out in the quarry. The Gentiles did all the carving, and then they brought it to the Jews. And the Jews, once it was carved, then they could.
but Solomon is building the temple.
Yes, but I can't remember if it was something Solomon did or something David did in preparation. I can't remember
I
which
think
way
it
it
was
goes.
something David did to start it, and then
But what gets me is it was always okay for somebody else to sin. They're okay with somebody else breaking something that would be God's law because they aren't part of God's people. Whereas for Christians, it's not okay for anybody to break God's laws. But as Christians, we happen to be the ones who have forgiveness of sins versus the lost who do not have forgiveness of sins. And that was, when you're talking about extinguishing a fire, I'm thinking, well, it's okay for the firefighters to come do it. It's just not okay for, and that was, as I read this, it also reminded me of situational ethics. But we already looked at situational ethics when we looked at Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, where they didn't bow down and worship idols and then repent later. Situational ethics says we can sin as long as we repent of it later. But our examples show that that's not okay. And so this rule of, well, you can't extinguish a fire unless someone's life is in danger, to me goes back to the situational ethics, which the Jews have already proven that really wasn't okay according to God. So I thought that one was kind of interesting on the extinguishing. Yes.
on the extinguisher, it would be interesting to me also because people would have like jars of water for drinking out of, and you never know when the water's going to spill into the fire.
You wouldn't actually be that close to the fire likely. Okay. Well, all right. Number 4, finishing. This one, I couldn't quite understand it. As I was taking notes, it was you couldn't put it together unless it also could come apart.
Everything.
You also couldn't cut or tear paper, including toilet paper. They have special Sabbath toilet paper. And I'm like, wow. You also couldn't put new laces in your tennis shoes because that was finishing something. And I'm just like, that's not finishing. That's not finishing. I don't understand that. But the ship, you couldn't steer the ship. But it was okay for the non-Jew to steer the ship. Again, those things where it was okay for some, for non-Jews to break things, that would be God's laws. Couldn't wind the clock. You can't. Yeah, couldn't blow up the water wings. You couldn't tune a musical instrument. Like all these, wow.
But you could put together like a puzzle.
Yeah, we decided a puzzle was something you could do on the Sabbath because puzzles aren't permanent. Because you're supposed to take the puzzle back apart and put it back in the box.
But for those who like glue it together.
Yeah, if you're one of those people who leaves your puzzles together, well, you're in trouble. So that one really kind of blew my mind.
And I don't understand, other than at the beginning, where it's talking about finishing or repairing
Mhm.
items.
Mhm.
I can see that as doing work.
Yes.
The woman's always fixing something. For the
Yes.
kids,
Yes.
always repairing something,
Yes.
or if that's just the profession to the old and finish.
Yes. So well, again, some of the stuff I truly understand as the work aspect. Others of it, it to me just seems so far off of what a finished product, like the whole point of what that would be. That I really struggle with some of that. Number 5 was writing. Oh, Sharon, do you have anything to say?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right. Well, I thought I kind of heard something, but I was like, oh, she's not saying anything. Well, then Lyra was like, wait, Sharon. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll make sure Sharon's good. So I thought maybe she saw something I didn't. So number 5, writing. No writing, no drawing, no printing, no, you couldn't even can't use a rubber stamp.
Because I love
Yes. And this is where it talks about, the main objective of writing is keeping records. And so the spirit of the law forbids any activity normally requiring a written record. Thus the Sanhedrin forbid all sorts of business activity, as well as marriages and divorces on the Sabbath. Now that I can understand, because again, the written transaction that would go on there. I did find it interesting. Calculations and measurements are also included since they normally involve writing. And I'm like, what about those people who do it in their head? Like, what does that mean? I was highly amused. Gambling and playing games of chance are also forbidden in the writing category. And I'm going, shouldn't gambling be forbidden anyway? I'm like, how in the world I don't get that.
Yeah.
games of chance.
So and that's like, we play games all the time. Like let's play Uno. We couldn't play Uno on Saturday because we can't keep score.
Yeah, people would have to like memorize.
So I found that interesting. Any other thoughts on 5? Number 6, erasing. So erasing or destroying any form of writing, breaking or tearing through words. So I couldn't use my shredder to take care of all those ridiculous credit card applications that come in the mail. Although it is permitted to tear a package to get the food inside, it should be avoided whenever possible. So and you can't tear the writing, and so I'm going, well, I guess you would want to open that Friday evening if possible, so that you didn't have to worry about it on Saturday.
Or you could get scissors.
Well, but even some of those where it's that, tear here and it has the writing along the package where it wants you to tear, well, you couldn't do that. So that one was interesting. And then
The next one about the book is mind blowing to me. Of the library steps.
I got to get to my right.
Within the right part or parents work,
Yes.
the library has the stamps.
Yes. Yes.
Well, you can open the book that had that.
Mhm. Yes.
It's got something
Correct.
But couldn't you open it without like messing up the words?
In some, but you know, it'll print on here something, you know, about property of Bobby Jean Memorial Library, or it'll have something printed along the edge. So you couldn't open that because if it split the lettering, that would be breaking the commandment.
Some books that have it like stamped crookedly.
Well, you would have to be very careful. You definitely would have to be careful about what you read. So yeah, that one was.
What would be, what's the point? I don't understand.
You tear in the letter.
Again,
What's the point of
it
taking the letter apart?
that I can
I don't remember of our scriptures. I don't remember anything about
mm-mm.
other than the don't kindle a fire.
No, and again, it has to do with that working, and it's where they take. It's how far do they extend it, and so yeah, you're right. I didn't understand. I couldn't understand things for some of that, so I agree. Anything else on erasing?
I have a question
Hmm.
about it. So you couldn't erase things. I get that, but could you like if you know how ink can smudge the erasing things? What if you actually smudged ink that you did it like after someone had written it, like as it switches over to the next day? How do you
Okay, so Lyra is totally my child because I tell people all the time, I'm the reason for lawyers and fine print. Because if there is some weird, random, stupid question to ask about it, I will ask it. And here is my child. Yes, yes,
I mean, that's different categories here.
yes.
Very good question.
All
You
right,
have to wait, right?
yes, unless it's an emergency.
Well, a smudge on a paper.
All right, so number 7, cooking. So no cooking, no baking, no boiling water, no melting wax or metal. This one there was a note, the prohibition against cooking does not prevent us from eating hot food on the Sabbath. Indeed, part of our Sabbath joy consists of eating hot food. However, this must be prepared in such a manner that no act of cooking actually takes place on the Sabbath. And so again, how my stove would work. And one of the things I want to know is, when was this figured out? When did this law come into place? And how did they do it? Because I'm thinking again of biblical times, and how was that carried out versus at what point could they figure out, well, they could just keep stuff hot when some type of stove burning, you know, some type of like when. So that one made it kind of interesting. Let's see here. It talked about, again, this is some of the stuff that I don't understand with what's burning, since they forbid burning, but you could have the stove on, you just can't adjust the stove settings. And again, so like the knobs are covered in a certain way, but I'm like, how's that not burning? So again,
So you were talking about how you can burn and how you can adjust the settings and stuff. I wonder if you could like turn it off if you accidentally bumped.
no, it talks about they have a specific special covering that goes over it so that you can't adjust it at all.
Okay.
So that way you don't accidentally do
Well,
it.
the covering.
Nope. Okay. Any other thoughts on that one? Okay. Washing. So no washing, no bleaching of a garment in any manner, no removing of any spot or stain from the clothing, no wringing out wet garments. And I mean, that's all work. I get that. That was kind of easy. The stain removing one, I'm like, man, I'd be in trouble because I can't spray and wash my clothes then. Number 9, sewing. That one's kind of easy to understand. The thing that I, found interesting was like you could use a safety pin because that was temporary. So again, it's those things of permanence. You can't permanently do anything.
I wonder, some things people will sew, and then there's things that you can undo the stitches.
I'm going, if it's something I've sewn, it's probably going to come undone anyway. So it's not. Still working on that. But that one for the most part was pretty easy. But it also, the pasting, no taping, no stapling, all paper. I found that interesting. That was all included. Can't seal an envelope or attach a postage stamp. So number 10, tearing. This includes undoing any form of sewing. This also includes tearing a garment, separating glued papers fall under this heading as well. Again, I think that one, for the most part, makes sense. Any thoughts on that one? Number 11, knotting. This includes any permanent knots. However, any knot that is not permanent, you can do. So you can tie your shoes on the Sabbath because that knot is not meant to be permanent. And even if it's something, even if so then we get into number 12, which is untying. So even if your shoe accidentally winds up in one of those permanent knots, you are allowed to untie your shoe because it wasn't supposed to be that in the first place. So those two, 11 and 12, go hand in hand.
It's 12. It's confusing because if your shoe gets in a permanent knot, well, when my dog gets messed with it, gets in a permanent knot, I try to undo it, and it shifts from Friday to Saturday.
Well, that's okay though. That's what they're saying because the shoelace never should. The shoelace is not designed to be permanent anyway. And I think we've all had that experience where we go to pull our shoelace and for whatever reason, it's gotten looped the wrong way as you walk during the day. And oh, there it is. It's tied in a knot. Those are okay to fix because it wasn't supposed to be permanent anyway.
Okay. So I can double knot my shoes.
You could, because you are going to untie them. Even though they're double knotted,
It's not
the
mine.
point is, like, the point will be you will take them off at the end of the day.
Yes. Yeah, I
Okay.
double knot my shoes, and then I just like slip, slide.
Okay.
This made me think, is it when Jesus met Peter and Andrew, they were repairing their
Nets.
net?
Mhm.
So this would include, and that's a form of work
Mhm.
when you're repairing your fishing net.
Mhm.
So that would be, but shoelaces, that's, I don't know.
Yeah.
Unless you work in a shoe store.
So a fisherman would not be mending nets on the Sabbath.
Right.
Yeah.
They were supposed to be resting. They were
Yes.
not to be
They
doing
weren't
their
supposed to be doing
daily work.
Correct.
So that was the only thing I could think of. Why?
Well, also though, you think of your fishermen, but if you do any type of sailboating, I don't, but I know that there are knots that you tie. I know when you go camping, if you are, which that's a whole nother somewhere else, but like if you're camping and you're setting up a tent, you have these special knots that you tie. If you are, if you're a trapper, you would tie a special knot to snare whatever critter you're doing. So those are all things that would fall into the work category.
Okay, I'm not familiar with any of that, so I've never done any of that.
I haven't done any of it either, but
That's why I didn't think about it.
Yeah.
Repairing the net,
Yes. So there are quite a few things. Of course, an Orthodox Jew would not be working in the hospital on the Sabbath anyway, but working in the hospital, if we ever have to restrain a patient, when we restrain them to the bed, the knot can never, ever, ever, ever be a permanent knot. It's what's called a quick release knot. That way, in case the patient ever gets tangled up in the restraints, you quick release the knot and you can untangle them rather quickly so that they don't suffocate to death, because many of patients have been strangled to death tied to a hospital bed or chair and things like that. But again, the Orthodox Jew isn't going to be working at the hospital on Saturday anyway, so it doesn't matter. But those are things that would include. But if you lived on a houseboat, if you trapped, if you made your living with hunting animals, trapping, Nick had shared a post the other day that he was out teaching the boys about trapping. And Lara went over there to play with the boys afterward a couple days later, and Nick wanted to watch some show on TV about trapping. So it's not something I've done, but I have a.
When we was watching the show on Sabbath, we talked about how most traps nowadays are metal and you don't actually have to tie them. All you have to do is like bury the chain, bury it with dirt and pack it down.
But if you're in any type of scouting type thing, if you know anything, but if you're snaring and different things, there's lots of reasons to tie knots. Yeah. Number 13, sharpening. So includes any type, includes cutting any object to a desired shape. Oh, shaping, sorry, not sharpening, shaping. This includes cutting any object to a desired shape. So no pottery.
With like the kind of clay I have, it comes undone and stuff. Do you mess with that?
Not sure, baby. It's not permanent, so probably you'd be okay, but I don't know. Also talked about cutting, the material for a dress, cutting out pictures, newspaper articles, can't cut wood, can't use metal, can't use a lathe, can't use a mill. I was really amused because foods are not included in this category. You can cut them to serve them. And I was like, well, why aren't foods included? Like, why is that one conveniently okay? I mean, again, those things that you, so any other thoughts on cutting? Shaping, actually. Anything on shaping?
A lot of this, until you get to food, it has to do, could have to do with working.
Correct. Yes, but now let's think about this. Think about the role of a woman in the Jewish culture. Their job is to serve. So if they are serving the food, if they are cutting the food to put it on the table, that's work. So again, it's that work outside the home versus the things that happen in the home that are just part of your everyday life, I guess. But that's an interesting thing to consider, because if you've been any type of stay-at-home housewife for any length of time, you know how much work goes into preparing the meals. Like, I mean, well, even so, you don't even have to be a stay-at-home housewife. Like, you come home from work in the evenings and you're cooking dinner, and like, it's a lot of work. And I was cracking up laughing. My grandmother used to always get onto me for this, and then Sharon got onto me for this. I was just dying laughing. Every time it was mealtime, my granny would ask me, well, aren't you going to make Dale's plate for him? Nope. He's got 2 working legs and 2 working arms, and I don't know what the man wants on his plate. And so again, that's cultural. Like, that is a sign of respect. That is one of the ways that you honor your husband, and I totally get that.
Ask if we're gonna make our plates.
Yeah, but your kids, nobody cares now. But I mean, it's a way of honoring your husband. That's work to do that.
Well, that would be a part of this.
Yes.
To make their own plates on the Sabbath.
I don't know. my kid would obviously starve to death. I don't make my kids their plate, and I haven't. If you can't make your own food, like here's the food, I'll put it in front of you, but if you can't make your own plate, determine what you want on it to eat, I guess you're gonna go hungry. That's part of training. Yeah.
Make your own sandwich. We visited some friends after church one Sunday night, and she rationed the food and made everybody's plate, or they are acting like that's what you're supposed to do, and apologized because something wasn't already on the plate. She rationed the ice. We don't live this way. It was a shock because I've never seen anybody do that.
Well, and I know,
You dip it yourself.
And-
If you don't eat it, if you don't want it, you have to.
Yes. yes,
I mean, like you said, it's culture.
yeah, there are definitely some cultural things with that. Okay. Number 14, plowing. So you can't do anything that improves the ground.
So I couldn't stick a shovel in the
Which
ground.
included digging up a garden and fertilizing it, which I kind of was amused again going, what about the kids? Because Lyra's, I grew up in the country, like I played in mud puddles, made big mud puddles. Lyra is always out digging in the dirt. I'm like,
I'll dig in the dirt with my hand.
so I really, because obviously you have to teach your children to respect God. You have to. And we'll get to more of that as we go through month 5. But as what point does this, as a parent, it really makes me stop and wonder some of this stuff.
Now, this one is specific.
It is.
Exodus, no, yeah, right, Exodus 34:21. Rest even in flowering time and in harvest time.
Yes,
So this is like direct
this one is.
from the original law.
Yes. So no plowing and harvest. So again, the point being, and for them, it was very specific about God providing for their needs. That was part of why they couldn't do those things, especially in the Sabbath year, that 7th year that the land was supposed to rest. God is going to provide for you. You have to trust that God will provide for you. So yes, that one was included. Planting, which in Exodus 34:21, it's no plowing or harvesting. But as I think about plowing, I would automatically put planting in that. I think of, in general, preparing my garden or dealing with my garden. So I would automatically put the planting in that.
Well, I think, yeah, flowering time and harvest time. So springtime and.
Yes.
I don't know if their seasons are the same or not, but
Pretty close. Jerusalem, Bethlehem, is pretty close to the same latitude. I never get latitude and longitude correct. But
Latitude is east to west.
so,
Longitude's up and down.
okay. Thank you. I was really hoping she could get that one for me. So, latitudinally speaking, Bethlehem, where I was born, is about the same as Waco, Texas, is what I was taught years ago. So that's why it was like, Jesus wasn't born in December because December is winter. And even in Waco, Texas, you aren't tending your flocks in the middle. You're not sleeping out with your flocks in the middle of the winter. So, but yes, so they're fairly close to what we are. So their seasons would, and they're in the Northern Hemisphere. And so their seasons will be very similar. Stop touching stuff. Their seasons will be very similar to ours. So yes, no plowing and no planting. Now there are some things though, and I see it again, spring and fall, and I don't know about culturally speaking over there. There are some crops that you grow specifically in the fall. There are some crops that you kind of winter over. I'm not a gardener enough to know specifically how all those worked, but I do know there are some like that. So, but I would imagine that would, I don't know if that was involved in their foods, because again, a lot of what we eat are hybrids. It's not always even directly what we've crossed naturally and genetically modified food. So really what we eat is not necessarily what they would be eating in terms of our fruits and vegetables and stuff.
But even the way it's worded in Exodus 34, you know, in the plowing, the planting time, and harvest time, whatever each particular plant
Mhm,
that they had,
mhm.
that would include, you know, not just, we usually think of spring and summer here,
Mhm.
summer and fall.
Yeah.
But this took into account
Well, and if,
the planting of that
mhm,
plant and the harvest of that plant.
yes.
So
Well, and if you live in places like California and Florida, they're growing crops year round. So, yeah, but I agree. Whatever the crop is, you couldn't do anything to do with it on those days. All right. I was amused though with the flowers. It forbidden placing flowers in water, cut flowers in water, or to even change their water, which really amused me because I'm like, once you cut a flower, it's technically dead anyway. Like you cut off its supply, you're only temporarily, you know, like, so I was kind of amused with that one, but
my only thought about that is because my sister-in-law has a flower shop in Walnut Ridge, and I think, oh, we're talking about florists here.
yeah,
You can't do your florist work, you can't do the flowers for a funeral, which, you know, sometimes she goes in on
Mhm.
Sunday morning.
Yes.
and it's her, because she's having to do a big funeral. And so that was, I thought about that. It is,
and
why else would it be if it wasn't for a work situation?
and that to me is something more modern because when did we start sending flowers for funerals?
Well, that's why I asked, when was this, when did they do this?
Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. Reaping. I think that one's pretty easy. So you can't cut or pluck anything that's growing. Again, that was stated. You couldn't pluck a fruit from the tree. You're not supposed to even, and to help make sure you don't pluck anything, they legislated that you can't even handle growing plants.
So you
Bec-
couldn't water.
You can't because sometimes you go into water or something and you might bump it and you knock a petal off or a leaf off. That would be plucking. That would be reaping. So that one I thought, you know,
But what did the leaf say?
not supposed to, you gotta wait. And then 17 is harvesting. So we go from plucking, which again, I think of fruit versus harvesting. So you're not going to actually cut the crop. You're not going to bind it. This is even more specific. Gathering fallen fruit into piles or placing them into a basket also falls into this heading. Because again, it's gathering. It's harvesting. That makes sense. Any other thoughts on that one?
Well, the prohibition about the carrying of the seeds.
Mhm.
that was-
Yeah.
So that is God's law.
Yes. Yeah. Jeremiah 17:21, do not bear a burden. Bring it into the city. Let's see here. I do. Well, you couldn't bind anything and put it on your animal. It said, Nehemiah 13. So you can't, Nehemiah 13:15, in those days I saw in Judah people treading wine presses on the Sabbath and bringing in heaps of grain and loading them on donkeys, and also wine, grapes, figs, and all kinds of other loads, which they brought into the Sabbath. So those, again, talks about the heaps of grains and loading those. And so to me, I think that I would include that here. Okay. Yes. Well, then we go to 18, which is the threshing, which to me, I guess, I don't know, because I'm not agricultural, but I would include all of this with harvesting, because to me, when I think of harvesting, I think about preparing your food for consumption. And of course, the threshing would be where you're separating out what you can eat versus what you can't eat. And I would have included that with harvesting anyway, but again, I am not agricultural anything. So maybe that's a far stretch on my side, and maybe it is something that's different. I should have asked.
Well, the farmers here, they gather the rice, and I don't know that it's separated. You know, they may take it into the trucks to the rice and foods. I don't know that at what point rice and foods separates.
Yeah.
So that would be a work.
And it kind of depends on what the crop is. I know,
They didn't have rice. So.
yeah, but I know like corn and when you use a harvester with corn, it will automatically separate. There are some that will automatically separate the cobs from the stalks. Pumpkins is another really interesting thing, like pumpkin seeds that we buy. When they harvest for pumpkin seeds, they quite literally, it amazes me, they have these huge fields of pumpkins, and they literally go through, and their harvesting machine will destroy the pumpkins, and it separates off the seeds, and the seeds get stored separately, and all the wasted pumpkin just gets left in the field as byproduct that they'll till back up into the ground.
I didn't think about that. I didn't know that's how they did.
It's one of those weird things I read all the time. Yes,
Why
so,
did you destroy a pumpkin?
well, because all they wanted are the seeds out of it.
Then why did you plant it?
Because you gotta have pumpkin seeds, because like we eat pumpkin seeds.
Well, and that's put back in as fertilizer.
Yes, and it would be good for the ground anyway.
Yeah,
So,
that's just fertilizer for the next year.
yes,
But wouldn't you want to save some pumpkins for me?
Well, that's a different deal.
that is a different field. That's a whole different crop that you're growing. So, okay. Any other thoughts on threshing? Oh, I did find it fascinating. Sorry, excuse me. You can't, it says squeezing fruit for its juice is also included. And the same is true for milking a cow. I was like, poor Betsy's going to be real sore up by the time the Sabbath is over because she ain't going to get milked. It's being silly about the cow's name. But I did find that fascinating that milking a cow would be part of threshing. I think I can see where it could be work, but I'm like, squeezing the juice, I'm like, so can't go juicing on the Sabbath either. So okay. What you got?
So for this, when I think of threshing, I think of like those forks where they would have like shoved up the grain and there goes the chaff, down falls the grain. But here when it puts in the juice, I'm like, how does that fit in? Like, do they like fling up the fruit in the air and it splatters on the grass?
No, so the squeezing the juice out something different. And apparently threshing, so it says this includes where food is separated from its natural container. And then there's winnowing, which winnowing is actually different. That's where you would separate off the chaff. And again, I'm all going, this is harvesting. This is all, in my non-agricultural mind, I'm like, this is all part of the same thing anyway. But
You can harvest and have your buckets of harvested, and then you take those buckets and clean it. And winnowing is a part of the
Cleaning.
process, which is separate from the threshing.
yeah, well, it's like, because you have your threshing floor And I guess they would winnow on the threshing floor, but I don't know. Again,
I think that it depends on the crop.
yes. And again, my non-agricultural self here. Okay, number 20, selecting. This includes separating unwanted portions of food by hand,
We went
Um,
from dressing to
threshing, and then winnowing. And now we're on selecting on 20. So I was kind of confused about that one. So like when you're eating berries, I think about, when you buy the berries, or even if you picked berries, I'm like, you can't pick out the good ones and the bad ones. Fascinating. So, and this one, like the fact that you couldn't pick out the bones from the fish, which is why they only eat a specific type of fish on the Sabbath, so that the bones are already removed.
or a fish that doesn't have bones.
All fish have bones.
Not all jellyfish don't.
That's not fish. They're not going to eat it anyway because it doesn't have fins and scales. It does not fall into an edible thing for them. All right. Any other things? Okay. Any other thoughts on selecting?
No. On this, in the list of questions,
Mhm.
and I had forgotten what this number 20 selecting meant. So I wrote it that there was where God, it's in the Nehemiah chapter. The men of power brought in fish and items and sold inside Jerusalem on the Sabbath, which God did not like.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote that down on that other piece of paper because I was thinking, well, if you go shopping, you're picking out the fish, you're picking out, you're selecting
Yes.
items, you're
Yes.
selecting from the merchants. And then I read this one where it said this one about food.
Well, and
But
again,
it's all the.
yes. Yeah, you couldn't go shopping for
Right.
multiple reasons because you can't select and you can't transfer ownership and you can't. So
You can't carry money
yes.
according to number one.
Well, and you couldn't carry your food items back. And again, for the person who's doing or grocery shopping, and I hate that chore. It's work. It's so much work. I hate it. But somebody has to work. If you're going to go shopping, somebody is working. So it makes sense that it'd be forbidden because even if you're like, well, I'm just buying, it's not working. But for the person who is selling you, they're working. So yes, it all goes hand in hand.
Well, and two, I was thinking about that. And I've forgotten where, I wrote it down. I don't remember now what it was. Well, in the 7 years
Mm-hmm.
for the land, the 7th year.
The 7th year.
It says that the maids are not to work, the sons of the maids, the manservants are not to work
Mm-hmm.
on the Sabbath. And even if the household person, the homeowner, if he obeyed the Sabbath rule and his wife obeyed, but you've got all these maids and servants and slaves going around working for you,
Yes.
but God said, no,
Yes.
that's not how we do it.
Correct.
Or that is not how you are to do it. Not even the maids, not the sons, not the animals are supposed to be working.
Yes.
So this would, that has to be part of, this number 20 has to be a part of that. That's the reasoning for it.
And I can see that. Okay, 21, sifting. You can't separate unwanted portions of food by means of a sieve. You can't also sift flour. All that makes sense. You can't bake anyway. You can't cook. So,
I haven't done it the day before.
yes. 22, grinding. For the most part, it made sense, but I was a little amused going, we have the pepper grinders for our table. And I'm like, well, I couldn't use my pepper grinder. Can't grind your coffee. All have to be done beforehand. Of course, I guess you couldn't actually make coffee anyway because you boil the water. So if you have hot coffee. Yeah. I found it like you couldn't use a mortar. I did find this fascinating because as a nurse, and I'm sure Gavin, as a pharmacist, dealt with some of these things. I hate those pill crusher things, but I love a good mortar and pestle to crush me some pills. I need to get me what I love those things. Those are always like if there were a whole bunch of nurses in the med room trying to crush their pills to hand them out to the people who couldn't swallow the pills, everybody was fighting over the mortar because we all wanted that. So I'm like, well, you can't crush your pills. You'd have to crush your pills the night before. Can't grate cheese, can't grate vegetables, can't grind the meat. I did find it interesting that you couldn't grind the herbs that were used for medicine. So any herbs that you would have been using for medicine, again, you had to grind the day before, which makes me kind of curious because, again, we can clearly see Jesus healed on the Sabbath. So that doing good principle was there. You could do good on the Sabbath. So I'm like, well, I would imagine if somebody got, and this is, except for a sick person. So if somebody was injured that day or something, they came down sick, you would have to do good. You would have to make the exception and to be able to work on, otherwise they're going to get so sick and you're going to have other issues, which they talked about, non-vital medicines and treatments except for a sick person. So I did find that interesting. Acute illnesses were the exception. Any other thoughts on the grinding on 22? Okay, let's look at 23. I can't get my page to turn. 23 is kneading. Includes combining a powder with a liquid to make a dough or a paste. Again, that to me all seems pretty standard with the cooking concept. And if you've ever kneaded bread, it's a lot of work. I don't want to do it on Sabbath. I don't want to do it any day. It's a lot of work. So that one makes sense to me. 24, combing. Good grief. I am done for the day, apparently. 24, combing. You couldn't comb the wool or cotton in preparation for making it into thread.
Could you comb your hair?
Yes, I would imagine. But so this is talking about the work aspect.
Combing your hair can be a whole bunch
If you,
of work.
but you would just, that's why, women, you braid up in the night before. Okay. So that one makes sense. 25, spinning. So I've watched them. I've never done this, but I've seen many exhibitions where they're using, where they're spinning yarn. That's work. That's pretty easy understanding. Rope making activities. That one's pretty easy. Making felt is also included. And if I knew anything about how felt was made, that would probably make sense to me too, but I don't know anything about how felt is made. So, all right. Any other thoughts on spinning? 26, dyeing. You can't change the color of any objects or substance. Can't dye clothing, no painting, no mixing paints. I did find this kind of funny for some people. I don't wear makeup, so it's not an issue, but I have so many friends and I'm like, the spirit of this law also prohibits the use of lipstick and eyeshadow. And I'm like, oh, I wonder how many women, how do they adhere to that? Because I know for some women, they don't. I have a really good friend. My mom has a really good friend. In fact, she even talks about how her husband has never seen her face fully cleaned of makeup.
Oh my.
And they've been married 40 plus years.
Oh my.
And so I'm just like, wow, for some people that would be a problem.
You have to go to this. There are permanent cosmetics that you put on before the Sabbath.
Well, and yeah, she does.
Last the whole day.
Yeah. So you would have to do your makeup on Friday night, and then you would have makeup on for Saturday.
Okay. Well, tattoo is forbidden, so you couldn't tattoo it.
Yeah, it would just be the more, longer lasting cosmetics. And I'm sitting here going, he talks about lipstick being forbidden, but of course it's the dead of winter and my lips are chapped. And I'm like, I use chapstick? Because that's not, because I'm like, my lips can crack and bleed and have their own issues. So yeah.
Well, isn't it the color they're talking about? The dye, the color?
Yeah, this is, so it is the dyeing process. So yeah, it's plain. So it's just
So
putting.
you could use your chapstick if it wasn't
Yeah.
red.
Yeah, because I would imagine, because that would to me fall under a similar category to lotion. I didn't think about lotion being forbidden.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But I'm sure if we look closer, it probably is.
I think I would just have to sit still till the Sabbath was over.
No one's going to see Sharon here.
I would never make it through it at all.
I think I would have to be sedated for the Sabbath.
I would
would
have to
struggle.
be strapped to my bed.
Okay. 27, chain stitching. You can't crochet. You can't braid. You can't basket weave. You can't net make. Can't set up the loom for weaving. All of that makes sense to me. I mean, it goes with the whole thing of sewing. It's work. So that one, I mean, yeah, so that makes sense. I know people who hobby do those things and they find it very relaxing and therapeutic and different things like that. Even still the case, even painting, I love painting, but that's work. So, you know, it goes into that dyeing process. So yeah, that all makes sense.
Okay.
Let's see here, wrapping. So you couldn't wrap the loom.
What's a
Fine.
loom?
A loom is the big thing where they weave the threads through and they make blankets and different things.
You couldn't wrap a present, right?
I don't know about that, my love.
Well, it wouldn't be permanent because
All right.
eventually you would.
29, weaving, can't weave. No needlework, no embroidery, no needlepoint, no rug hooking. Yep, all makes sense. Unraveling. You can't unravel anything that's woven or knitted. Okay.
Can you unravel like yarn?
No.
What if you picked over a ball of yarn though?
Baby girl, it's all picked up. Number 31, building. You can't build anything, can't assemble, can't make repairs, can't even drive a nail. You can't pitch a tent of any kind. And while I agree that pitching a tent of any kind does work, I'm going, but tents are temporary. So
Some people live in tents.
this is true. I've known people. This was interesting. The spirit of the law forbids the opening of an umbrella, even when it will not be carried outside, since it affords the protection of the elements. And so again, I think this all has to go back with that, having the authority over creation, which having authority over creation is work. So I'm guessing that's where that comes from. Any thoughts on building? 32, demolishing, that makes sense too. You can't undo any building operation. Can't take down the tent. So yep, that's pretty simple. 33, trapping. This includes the capturing and the capturing or restricting the freedom of any living animal. This one was fascinating. Even the catching of an insect in one's hands comes under this heading.
What if the bug lands on you?
You can't trap it. You gotta shoo it away. So that one was fascinating because I'm thinking if a bug gets in my house, I often, depending on what it is, I usually try to rehome it back outside of my house. So I'm like, well, I couldn't trap it, even though my intention is to let it go. So that one was interesting. Any thoughts on trapping? 34, shearing. That makes plenty of sense. You can't remove hair, wool, or feathers from any living creature. So you can't get haircuts, can't shave, can't cut your fingernails, can't pluck your eyebrows. Oh, here it is. Here it is, Lara. I forgot. The spirit of the law also forbids the combing of hair on the Sabbath, since this normally also involves pulling hair out. But it does give permission for using a soft brush that won't pull the hair, which again, I would imagine that they would do something to their hair on Friday evening before the Sabbath to keep their hair pulled up and managed. Any thoughts on that one? Okay, 35, slaughtering. That's work. Even, I mean, I get that one. You can't kill the animal. I was swatting a fly or a mosquito is also included, as is wounding or bruising an animal or human being. So I'm really glad, given where we live, that I'm not an Orthodox Jew, because I kill all kinds of mosquitoes all the time.
But it would be small.
But of course, the things that pose danger to human life may be killed on the Sabbath. But of course, I'm going, hello, mosquitoes carry malaria and West Nile and all kinds of other things, and I don't want that. I'm also thinking, picking a tick. I pick my ticks and I kill them because I don't want any tick illnesses. So I don't know. To me, that all endangers human life, and it can. So I don't know. Any other thoughts on slaughtering?
Well, maybe this was they don't have ticks and all these things over there. I don't know.
But this,
I have, I mean, where did that come from? I don't remember reading anything about flies and mosquitoes.
I don't know about mosquitoes, honestly, but I mean, they do have flies. Mosquitoes thrive, like they lay their eggs in pools of stagnant water. So I'm not real sure. I don't really know. I'd have to check. I'd have to check on that one.
I mean, is that something from
And
time, or is it a modern day?
well, the other thing is this was published by the National Conference of Synagogue Youth. I don't know if this is, I didn't look real specifically at this. I don't know if this is, I would imagine this is something that would apply to all Orthodox Jews, not just Jews living in the current nation of Israel. Because there are Orthodox practicing Jews who live in other countries still. Not all the Jews went back to Israel when it was created. So as far as I know, all of this would apply to Jews everywhere.
This was also printed in 2006.
Yeah, it was last updated in 2006, but it's up to date. Okay. So I don't know. I would imagine those things are over there. Just not sure about it, all of it. Number 36, skinning. Can't skin the animal to get the hide. That's simple. 37, tanning. You can't do any part of the tanning process to soften the hide.
Well,
You can't rub the oil or saddle soap onto the leather. All of this makes sense as work to me. 38, smoothing. You can't, so it's smoothing and polishing. So you can't prepare leather where the hair is removed. You can't shine the shoes. You can't polish the silver or other metals. So that's work. I get all that. Any thoughts on that one? I mean, I don't think it was, I mean, clearly I don't recall any laws that specifically, but it makes sense to me. 39, marking. This includes marking or scoring lines on a surface in preparation for cutting or writing. So again, that, if you're thinking of the seamstress who's marking stuff out, I'm thinking, Dale is a welder. I've seen them use the chalk on the metals that they're going to cut. I've seen them do the marking and measurements on tubing and stuff they're going to cut. Mechanicking, like all of, I mean, that makes sense to me. It's all,
On marking, could I like mark on like, could I mark in my Bible like I do highlighting the verse?
to be honest, I don't think they allow marking in God's word.
Cool.
I could be wrong, but knowing what I understanding what I know, I don't think they do any Bible marking. Well, they don't have the Bible. It's not called the Bible anyway, in terms of what the Old Testament would be called. But I don't think they, because, and as you looked through this, it was really funny, because I had mentioned previously, when we were talking about the Lord's name, they won't even write it all out.
No.
And there was an example in the carrying, they consider his name so reverent that they won't even write the whole thing. So they would not write in his holy word.
It was like G dash D.
Okay.
Well, wasn't there something about writing letters?
Yes.
So, no, you couldn't write a word anywhere.
Mhm.
It had- Unless it.
Yeah.
A or S, for some reason, you could write E, maybe.
Something I saw somewhere along the way, it talked about 2. You couldn't write any more than 2, and you couldn't erase more than 2, but man, now I can't remember.
Hold on, here it is.
I looked at so much stuff I can't remember now. So those are some fascinating things about how Orthodox Jews practice the Sabbath today. And that was a very long discussion, I know, and I thank you ladies so much for the thoughts. Any other thoughts or questions before we call it a night?
I have
What?
Well, if part of this began under the Roman laws, talked about that last week, where the Romans were in charge.
Mhm.
And when the term Sanhedrin
Mhm.
was began as the name of the group of elders,
Mhm.
I can see how some of these nitpicky little rules were put into place because of the Romans' oppression. That's why I asked, when did they start all this?
And again, we'd have to look real close at it, because this is for the Orthodox Jew, and I don't know when this fight became a thing. Because again, up until AD 70, they were still Jews. They were still Jews as Jews were, as God prescribed them.
Well, even after the Holocaust, I read somewhere, was it 1940, when so many thousands came back to Israel. So is this from there? So the timeline does make a difference.
Yes.
on some of it.
It does. I would imagine some of this, and I don't know when Orthodox Judaism really became a thing, I guess, I would imagine clearly the Jews who were living in AD 70, even though they lost Jerusalem, I would imagine they were still behaving as Jews to the best that they could. But again, everything was then altered because you had no priesthood, you had no way to offer sacrifices, you had nothing. And so it's really fascinating when you consider what God did in destroying Judaism to make sure that it could not be a thing. It really couldn't be a thing anymore.
And yet people
Well, they do make it a thing because they don't recognize Jesus as the Messiah. So it's still, for them, they still are Jews. But we can see things differently. So Any other thoughts, questions, comments? No. All right. Well, Sharon, we'll get off here and we will talk to
Okay.
you later.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.